The thunder cracked across the Montana sky as Virginia Matthews clutched her swollen belly, stumbling through the mud toward the only light she could see for miles. April 1872 had brought relentless spring storms, and this one had caught her unprepared on the long walk from town. Her soaked dress clung to her 8-month pregnant frame as she pushed through the gate of a small ranch she'd never visited before. Just as her legs threatened to give way beneath her, the front door swung open, and a tall figure emerged with a lantern held high. "Madam, you all right out there?" The deep voice carried over the rain. Virginia tried to respond, but exhaustion and cold had sapped her strength. She managed 2 more steps before collapsing onto the muddy yard. In an instant, the man was beside her, strong arms lifting her with surprising gentleness. "I've got you, madam. You and your little one." Through rain-blurred vision, Virginia saw a weathered face with kind eyes beneath the brim of a cowboy hat. Then darkness claimed her. When Virginia awoke, she was wrapped in warm blankets before a crackling fire. The cabin was small but tidy, with simple furnishings and the lingering scent of coffee in the air. She tried to sit up, wincing as her body protested. "Easy there," came that same deep voice. The cowboy approached with a steaming mug. "You gave me quite a fright, Mississippi." "Matthews." "Virginia Matthews," she managed, accepting the offered drink with trembling hands. "Thank you for taking me in." "Angus Reid," he replied with a slight bow. "And it's no trouble at all. Couldn't leave you out in that storm, especially." His eyes flickered to her belly. Virginia instinctively placed a protective hand over her unborn child. "We're fine. Just tired and a bit foolish for walking so far." Angus pulled a chair closer to the fire. "Where were you headed? Your husband must be worried sick." The question sent a wave of shame through her. "I have no husband," Virginia admitted softly, eyes downcast. "I was heading to Silver Creek, hoping to find work before." She trailed off, the reality of her desperate situation hanging between them. Angus said nothing for a long moment, his face unreadable in the firelight. Then he stood, walked to the window, and gazed out at the storm that showed no signs of relenting. "You'll stay here tonight," he stated simply. "Tomorrow, we'll figure things out." Virginia shook her head. "I couldn't impose, it settled," Angus interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Then, more gently, "I've got a spare room. It's not much, but it's dry." When morning came, Virginia woke to the smell of frying bacon. She found Angus at the cast-iron stove, his tall frame incongruous in the domestic setting. He wore a clean shirt, suspenders, and had clearly made an effort to tame his sandy brown hair. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, sliding eggs onto a plate. "Baby too, I reckon." Virginia smiled for the first time since arriving. "Starving, actually. Both of us." As they ate, Virginia explained her situation. She'd been working as a schoolteacher in Helena when she'd fallen in love with a charming bank clerk named James. He'd promised marriage, then disappeared the moment she told him about the baby. With her reputation ruined, she'd lost her teaching position and had been surviving on savings while searching for somewhere she could start fresh. "Silver Creek needs a teacher," Angus mentioned, refilling her coffee cup. "School's been closed since Miss Holloway married last fall." Hope fluttered in Virginia's chest. "Would they hire someone in my condition?" Angus's expression darkened. "Folks can be hard on women in your situation. Not fair, but that's how it is." He hesitated, then added, "You could stay here until after the baby comes. Ranch isn't much, but there's space enough." Virginia stared at him, astonished. "Mr. Reid, you don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied simply. Then, looking directly at her with those steady eyes, he said something that changed her life forever. "I'll love you and every child you bring," the cowboy said to the pregnant woman in his yard. Virginia's breath caught. "Mr. Reid." "Angus," he corrected. And I know it sounds peculiar, but I'm a man who speaks his mind. Been alone too long, I suppose. He stood and walked to the window. My wife died birthing our son 8 years ago. Lost them both. This ranch has been mighty quiet since then. Virginia didn't know how to respond to his declaration. It seemed impossible love offered so freely to a stranger. Yet there was no mistaking the sincerity in his voice. The storms let up, he continued, changing the subject. I need to check on the cattle. Rest today. We can talk more this evening. After Angus left, Virginia explored the small ranch house. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and the main room with its stone fireplace. Simple furnishings, but everything was well maintained. On a shelf, she found a small, framed photograph of a young woman with a gentle smile. Outside, beyond the yard, stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed. A barn and corral stood nearby, and a small creek wound through the property. It was modest but beautiful in its way, with the mountains rising purple in the distance. By the time Angus returned, Virginia had swept the floors and prepared a simple stew from provisions she'd found in the kitchen. It was the least she could do. You didn't need to cook, he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. I wanted to, Virginia replied. Though I hope you don't regret taking me in when you taste my cooking. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she'd seen. Been eating my own cooking for years. Can't be worse than that. Over dinner, Angus told her about his ranch. He ran about 80 head of cattle, nothing compared to the big operations, but enough to make a decent living. He'd built the house himself when he and his wife, and had settled here after marrying in '62. What you said earlier, Virginia ventured carefully, about loving me and my child. You can't possibly mean that. Angus set down his fork. I said what I meant. But I don't expect anything from you, Virginia. You need a safe place, and I can provide that. No strings attached. People will talk. Let them. He shrugged. Truth is, I've been alone a long time. Having you here, even for a little while, it brings life back to this place. That night, in the small bedroom that had once belonged to Angus Reid, Virginia lay awake pondering her situation. She'd come west seeking independence, determined to make her own way despite her circumstances. Angus's offer of shelter was a godsend, but his declaration of love, impossible as it seemed, complicated everything. Could a man truly love a woman he'd just met? And not just her, but the child she carried, another man's child? It seemed like a fairy tale, not the harsh reality she'd come to expect from life. The baby kicked, as if offering its opinion, and Virginia smiled in the darkness. Perhaps they had found sanctuary after all. Days passed into weeks, and Virginia found herself settling into life at the Reid Ranch. Angus worked from sunrise to sunset, caring for his cattle and land with quiet dedication. Virginia took over the household tasks, finding satisfaction in creating a home once more. They developed a routine. Breakfast together before Angus headed out, dinner in the evening where they shared the events of their day. Sometimes he read aloud from one of his precious books while Virginia mended clothing or knitted tiny garments for her coming child. One evening, as May brought warmer weather, Angus returned with a wooden cradle loaded in his wagon. Made it years ago, he explained as they carried it into the house. Never got used. Virginia ran her fingers over the smooth wood, noting the careful craftsmanship. It's beautiful, Angus. Baby needs somewhere to sleep, he said simply, but she could see the emotion he tried to hide. That night, after Angus had retired to his room, Virginia sat by the fire contemplating how quickly her life had changed. She was due to give birth within weeks, living in the home of a man who declared his love despite knowing nothing about her. A man who prepared for her child as if it were his own. She realized with startling clarity that she was developing feelings for the quiet cowboy. His steady presence, his unwavering support, His gentle consideration all had worked their way into her heart. The following Sunday, Angus surprised her by hitching up the wagon. "Thought you might like to attend church," he suggested. "Meet some folks from around these parts." Virginia hesitated. "Are you sure? People will certainly talk." "Let me worry about that," he replied, helping her up onto the wagon seat. St. Mary's was a simple white clapboard building on the outskirts of the nearest town. As Angus helped Virginia down from the wagon, she felt eyes turning toward them, whispers rising like a gentle breeze. Angus nodded politely to everyone, introducing Virginia as Miss Matthews, staying at my ranch for a spell. His matter-of-fact tone discouraged further questions, though Virginia could see curiosity burning in many eyes. After the service, a gray-haired woman approached them. "Angus Reid, introducing a lady friend after all these years? Never thought I'd see the day." "Mrs. Hollister." Angus greeted her respectfully. "This is Miss Virginia Matthews." The older woman's kind eyes took in Virginia's condition without judgment. "Pleasure to meet you, dear. We're having dinner at our place today. You two should join us." Before Virginia could decline, Angus accepted. "We'd be honored, madam." The Hollister farm was larger than Angus's ranch, with a sprawling main house and several outbuildings. Inside, Virginia met Daniel Hollister, his sons and their wives, and a collection of grandchildren who raced about underfoot. "So, Miss Matthews," Mrs. Hollister said as they prepared the meal, "where are you from originally?" Virginia tensed, but decided honesty was best. "Boston originally. My father was a professor at Harvard." "Educated then?" Mrs. Hollister nodded approvingly. "We could use a teacher here. Our school's been closed since fall." Just as Angus had said. Virginia glanced through the doorway to where he sat with Daniel Hollister, discussing cattle prices. "I was a teacher, actually. In Helena." "Were you now?" Mrs. Hollister's eyes sparkled with interest. "And how did you come to be staying with our Angus?" Virginia told a simplified version of their meeting, omitting the part where Angus had declared his love. Mrs. Hollister listened attentively, occasionally nodding. "Well," she said when Virginia finished, "seems Providence brought you to the right door that night." She patted Virginia's hand. "Angus is a good man. Best kind of man. Lost his and the baby hard, he did. Never thought he'd open his heart again." During dinner, Virginia observed Angus with new eyes. He was quiet among the boisterous Hollister clan, but respected. The men sought his opinion on matters of ranching and local affairs. Children gravitated to him, seemingly drawn to his calm demeanor. On the ride home, Virginia finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Did you take me to church and the Hollisters to help establish my reputation?" Angus kept his eyes on the road. "Figured it wouldn't hurt for folks to meet you proper like." "Thank you," she said softly. He glanced at her then. "Mrs. Hollister mentioned the teaching position?" Virginia nodded. She did. "Town council meets Tuesday. I could speak to them if you'd like." The thought of teaching again filled Virginia with joy, but reality quickly tempered her enthusiasm. With a newborn? And no husband? They'd never hire me. Angus was quiet for a long moment, then said carefully, "They might hire a married woman." Virginia's heart stuttered. "Angus, just think on it," he said quickly. "No pressure. Just an option." That night, Virginia couldn't sleep. Marriage. To a man she'd known barely a month. A good man, certainly. A man who'd shown her nothing but kindness and respect. A man who claimed to love her, impossible as that seemed. But marriage was meant to be for love, wasn't it? The kind that grew over time, not declared in a moment of impulse to a stranger. Yet as she felt her baby move within her, Virginia considered her options realistically. As an unwed mother, her prospects were bleak. Angus offered security, respectability, and a home for her child. And if affection had begun to bloom between them, might love not follow in time? 2 days later, Virginia was hanging laundry when a sharp pain seized her lower back. She gasped, clutching the clothesline for support. When it passed, she continued her task, only to be stopped by another pain 15 minutes later. By the time Angus returned from the fields, Virginia was certain. Her labor had begun. "The baby's coming," she told him, gripping the back of a chair as another contraction tightened around her middle. Angus's face paled. "I'll fetch the doctor." "No time," Virginia gasped. "Baby's coming fast. Mrs. Hollister, get her." Angus hesitated only a moment before springing into action. He helped Virginia to the bedroom, then raced for his horse. "I'll be back as quick as I can," he promised. Alone, Virginia paced the small bedroom, breathing through contractions that came with increasing frequency. She'd assisted at births before, but facing her own was terrifying. What if something went wrong? What if she died like Angus's wife, leaving her baby motherless? An hour passed before she heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded her when Mrs. Hollister bustled in, rolling up her sleeves. "Well now, little one's in a hurry to meet the world," the older woman said cheerfully, assessing the situation. "Angus, fetch hot water and clean linens. Then make yourself scarce." The next hours blurred into a haze of pain and effort for Virginia. Mrs. Hollister's calm presence anchored her through the worst of it. Outside the bedroom door, she could occasionally hear Angus's footsteps pacing the floorboards. As twilight fell, Virginia gave a final, tremendous push, and her daughter slipped into the world with a lusty cry. "A beautiful girl," Mrs. Hollister announced, wrapping the infant in a clean blanket. "Perfect in every way." Tears streamed down Virginia's face as she took her daughter in her arms for the first time. The tiny face, scrunched and red, was the most beautiful sight she'd ever beheld. "Angus," Mrs. Hollister called. "Come meet this little lady." He entered hesitantly, hat in hand, his face a mixture of awe and remembered grief. When he saw Virginia holding the baby, he stopped, emotion rendering him speechless. "Would you like to hold her?" Virginia asked softly. Angus approached with reverence, accepting the tiny bundle as if he were being handed the most precious treasure in the world, which, Virginia supposed, he was. "She's perfect," he whispered, one large finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "Just like her mama." In that moment, watching Angus hold her daughter with such tenderness, Virginia's decision crystallized. "Her name is Alice," she said. "Alice and Matthews Reid." Angus's head snapped up, eyes questioning. "If your offer still stands," Virginia continued, heart pounding, "about loving us both." "It stands," he replied, voice rough with emotion. Mrs. Hollister tactfully busied herself with cleaning up, though Virginia noticed the pleased smile on the older woman's face. "Then yes," Virginia said. "I'll marry you, Angus Reid." 3 days later, with baby Alice sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Reverend Thomas from St. Mary's performed a simple ceremony in the ranch house living room. The Hollisters stood as witnesses, Mrs. Hollister dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Do you, Angus James Reid, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the Reverend asked. "I do," Angus replied, his voice strong and certain. "And do you, Virginia Elizabeth Matthews, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Virginia looked up at the tall cowboy who had taken in a desperate stranger and offered her not just shelter but a future. "I do," she said. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them man and wife, Angus leaned down and kissed her gently. It was their first kiss, sweet, tender, and full of promise. The Hollisters stayed for a small celebration, complete with a cake Mrs. Hollister had brought. As they were leaving, Daniel Hollister pulled Angus aside while his wife embraced Virginia. "Town council's meeting tomorrow," Mrs. Hollister told Virginia. "We'll put your name forward for the teaching position. With a respectable husband like Angus, shouldn't be any objection. But the baby, bring her along," Mrs. Hollister said simply. Children need education, and Alice needs her mama. We'll make it work. That night, after the guests had gone and Alice was fed and sleeping, Angus and Virginia faced the new reality of their marriage. Angus insisted on sleeping in the main room, giving Virginia and Alice the bedroom. "We'll build our marriage proper," he explained. "No rushing things." Virginia was both touched by his consideration and unsure how to proceed. They were married, yet still practically strangers. "Tell me about Boston," Angus requested as they sat before the fire. "What was it like growing up there?" Virginia described her childhood in the academic household, her father's position at the university, her mother's social circles. How she'd always wanted to teach, even as a young girl setting up her dolls as pupils. "And you?" she asked. "Were you born out west?" Angus nodded. "Missouri originally. Came west with my pa after the war with Mexico. He had notions about gold in California, but we only made it this far." A slight smile touched his lips. "Good thing, too. Found something better than gold here." "And?" Virginia asked gently. "Yes." His eyes grew distant with memory. "Met her in '61, just before the war started. Her father had the mercantile in town. I joined up with the Union, fought for 3 years. Came back and married her right away." He stared into the fire. "Had 6 good years together before." Virginia reached across and took his hand. "I'm so sorry, Angus." He squeezed her fingers. "Life goes on. Has to." His eyes met hers. "I meant what I said that first day, Virginia. I know it sounds impossible, but something in me recognized something in you. Like my heart knew you, even if my head didn't yet." Virginia felt warmth spread through her chest. "I think I'm beginning to understand that feeling." The following day, as promised, Mrs. Hollister presented Virginia's case to the town council. By evening, word arrived via a neighbor that Virginia Reid had been appointed as the new teacher for Silver Creek to start in September when the school reopened. "Mrs. Virginia Reid, schoolteacher," Angus said proudly as they celebrated the news. "Has a fine ring to it." Virginia beamed, Alice nursing contentedly at her breast. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she felt hopeful about the future. She had a husband, a home, and now a position that would allow her to use her education and support her family. Summer unfolded in a gentle rhythm of ranch work and caring for Alice. Virginia and Angus learned about each other in quiet evening conversations, morning coffee shared as the sun rose, and side-by-side labor maintaining their home. Virginia discovered that Angus was well-read despite his limited formal education, with a collection of books he treasured. He had a dry wit that emerged as he grew more comfortable with her, and a patience that seemed limitless whether dealing with stubborn cattle or a colicky baby. Angus learned that Virginia had a quick mind and quicker tongue, a talent for making something from nothing in the kitchen, and a fierce protective instinct toward those she cared for. He watched in wonder as she transformed his bachelor quarters into a true home, with curtains at the windows and wildflowers on the table. By July, they had settled into their married life, though they still maintained separate sleeping arrangements. Virginia sometimes caught Angus watching her with longing, but he never pressed the issue, true to his word about building their relationship properly. One evening, as a summer thunderstorm rolled across the plains, reminding Virginia of the night they'd met, she found Angus on the porch watching the lightning illuminate the distant mountains. "Reminds me of the night you came," he said as she joined him. "Thought you were a spirit at first, appearing out of the storm like that." Virginia leaned against the porch railing beside him. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You saved us, Angus." He shook his head. "You saved me, Virginia. This place was just existing before you came. Now it's living again." Virginia studied his profile, strong and steady in the intermittent flashes of lightning. 3 months of marriage had transformed her feelings from cautious gratitude to genuine affection. and more recently, to something deeper that made her pulse quicken when he was near. "Angus," she said softly, "I think it's time you moved your things back into the bedroom." He turned to her, eyes searching her face. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel obligated." Virginia took his weathered hand in hers. "I'm certain. I've come to care for you, Angus. Very much." His free hand came up to cup her cheek. "I've loved you since that first night, Virginia Reid. But I wanted to give you time to see if you could love me back." "I do," she whispered, the truth of it resonating through her. "I do love you." Their second kiss was different from the chaste one they'd shared at their wedding. This one held passion, promise, and the certainty of a love that had grown slowly but surely between them. That night, they truly became husband and wife, discovering each other with tenderness and growing passion. Afterward, lying in his arms, Virginia marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just a few months. "What are you thinking?" Angus murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm the luckiest woman alive," she replied honestly, "to have stumbled upon this ranch, this life. You." He pulled her closer. "We're both lucky. A family. Never thought I'd have that again." In September, the Silver Creek School reopened with Mrs. Virginia Reid as teacher. The small schoolhouse filled with 23 children ranging from 5 to 16 years old. Alice, now 4 months old, accompanied her mother, sleeping in her cradle in the corner while Virginia taught. To Virginia's surprise, she found the community largely accepting. A few mothers initially kept their distance, but most welcomed the new teacher warmly, especially after seeing her devotion to her students and her obvious happiness in her marriage. "You've won them over," Angus observed one evening as they discussed her day. "Mrs. Peterson brought you preserves, you said?" Virginia nodded, smiling. "And invited us for Sunday dinner next week." Angus kissed her forehead. "Told you they'd come around." Life settled into a pleasant routine. Virginia taught during the week, while Angus managed the ranch. On weekends, they worked together, sometimes accepting invitations from neighbors or hosting small gatherings themselves. Alice grew and thrived, adored by both her parents. The only shadow on their happiness came in late October, when Virginia received a letter forwarded from Helena. It was from James, Alice's biological father, saying he'd heard rumors she was in Silver Creek and wanted to discuss the situation. Virginia's hands trembled as she read the letter. "He wants money," she told Angus that evening. "Says he'll keep quiet about Alice being his if I pay him." Angus's face darkened with rare anger. "You don't owe him a cent. Alice is my daughter now, legally and in every way that matters. But if he comes here, starts telling people, let him," Angus said firmly. "We have nothing to hide. Everyone who matters knows I'm not Alice's blood father. Doesn't change a thing about our family." Virginia took strength from his certainty. "You're right. I won't be blackmailed." She wrote a brief response informing James that Alice had a father who loved her, and his presence or claims would not be welcomed. They heard nothing more, and as weeks passed with no sign of James, the concern faded. Christmas arrived with a blanket of snow transforming the ranch into a winter wonderland. Virginia and Angus celebrated quietly, exchanging simple gifts: a new hat for him, a book of poetry for her, and a soft woolen blanket they'd saved for to wrap Alice in. As they sat before the fire that evening, Alice sleeping contentedly in her father's arms, Virginia realized she'd never known such perfect happiness. The path that had brought her here had been difficult, marked by heartbreak and fear, but it had led to this moment, this family, this love. "What's that smile for?" Angus asked, noticing her expression. "Just thinking how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't gotten caught in that storm," she replied. "If I'd walked past your ranch in the dark." Angus shook his head. "Wouldn't have happened. Some things are meant to be, Virginia. You and me, Alice. We were always heading toward each other." She leaned over to kiss him, this man who'd become her world. I believe you're right. Winter passed in a blend of cozy evenings and crisp, bright days. Virginia continued teaching, bundling Alice against the cold for their daily trips to the schoolhouse. Angus focused on keeping the cattle fed and healthy through the harsh Montana winter. In February, as they celebrated their first Valentine's Day together with a special dinner after Alice was asleep, Virginia had news to share. I've been feeling different lately, she began, watching Angus's face across the candlelit table. Tired, a bit queasy in the mornings. His expression shifted from concern to dawning realization. Virginia, are you? She nodded, joy bubbling up. I think so. We're going to have a baby, Angus. A brother or sister for Alice. Angus was around the table in an instant, gathering her into his arms. A baby, he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Our baby. Virginia saw the shadow of old grief pass briefly over his features, the memory of and the son he'd lost, but it was quickly replaced by joy. This pregnancy would bring its own fears for him, she knew, but also healing. I'll take care this time, she promised. Mrs. Hollister says Doc Wilson is excellent, and I'll see him regularly. Angus pressed his forehead to hers. We'll both take care. All of us. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, transforming the ranch with fresh green grass and wildflowers. Virginia's pregnancy progressed well, her slight figure beginning to round with their child. Alice, now crawling and beginning to pull herself up on furniture, flourished under her parents' love and attention. In April, they celebrated the anniversary of Virginia's arrival at the ranch with a picnic by the creek. Alice played on a blanket beside them, babbling happily to herself. Hard to believe it's only been a year, Virginia mused, watching a butterfly dance over the water. Best year of my life, Angus replied simply, his hand resting protectively on her growing belly. Virginia leaned against his solid strength. Mine too. As summer approached, Virginia finished the school term, arranging for a substitute to take over in the fall while she cared for their new baby. The townspeople sent her off with gifts and well wishes, having fully accepted the Reids as respected members of the community. August brought scorching heat and the final weeks of Virginia's pregnancy. Angus hovered anxiously, hiring a young ranch hand named Tommy to help with the cattle so he could stay closer to the house. You're going to wear a path in the floorboards, Virginia teased as he paced one evening. Just want everything to be ready, he replied, checking for the dozenth time that the birthing supplies Mrs. Hollister had recommended were organized and accessible. Virginia understood his anxiety stemmed from his past loss. It will be different this time, she assured him. I promise. When her labor began on a sweltering August afternoon, Virginia was prepared. Mrs. Hollister arrived promptly, as did Doc Wilson, summoned by the ranch hand at Angus's insistence. Unlike Alice's hurried entrance into the world, this labor progressed slowly and steadily. Virginia breathed through each contraction, drawing strength from the knowledge that Angus waited just outside, praying for her and their child. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, Virginia gave a final push, and their son entered the world with a robust cry. A fine, healthy boy, Doc Wilson announced, handing the swaddled infant to Virginia after examining him thoroughly. Angus, she called weakly. Come meet your son. He entered cautiously, eyes wide with a mixture of joy and lingering fear. When he saw Virginia sitting up, tired but radiant, holding their son, the tension visibly drained from his body. He's perfect, Angus whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. Just perfect. Virginia placed the baby in his father's arms. I thought we might name him William after your father. William James Reid. Tears filled Angus's eyes as he cradled his son. William, he repeated softly. Little Will. Mrs. Hollister tactfully shooed Doc Wilson from the room, leaving the family to their private moment. Alice, who had been staying with the Hollistas, would join them tomorrow to meet her brother. "Thank you," Angus said, looking up from their son's face to meet Virginia's eyes. "For our family. For everything." Virginia reached out to touch his cheek. "Thank you for taking in a desperate stranger that stormy night. For loving me before you knew me. For loving Alice as your own." Angus leaned forward to kiss her gently. "Best decision I ever made." In the days that followed, they adjusted to life with 2 children. Alice was fascinated by her little brother, wanting to help with his care in her toddler way. Angus moved Alice's cradle into their room alongside Will's, creating a family nest that felt perfectly right. One evening, as Virginia nursed Will while Angus read a story to Alice, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. From the depths of despair alone, pregnant, and homeless to this abundant life filled with love. "Penny for your thoughts," Angus said, noticing her contemplative expression as he tucked Alice into her bed. "I was just thinking about that first day," Virginia replied, shifting Will to her shoulder to burp him. "What you said to me in the yard." Angus smiled, remembering that I'd love you and every child you bring. "It seemed impossible then," she said softly, "that anyone could offer such unconditional love to a stranger." "Not impossible," he corrected, sitting beside her and gently stroking Will's downy head. "Just rare, maybe. But when you know, you know." Virginia leaned against him, their children between them. "And you knew." "The moment I saw you in that storm," he confirmed. "Something in my heart recognized you, like I'd been waiting all along." As Will drifted to sleep and Alice's soft snores filled the room, Virginia and Angus sat together in the gentle lamplight, content in the knowledge that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to exactly where you're meant to be. 5 years passed, bringing changes and growth to the Reid family. The ranch prospered under Angus's careful management, expanding to include more cattle and several fine horses. Virginia divided her time between teaching and raising their growing family, finding fulfillment in both roles. Alice, now 6, had started school, showing her mother's quick intelligence and her father's quiet determination. Will, 5, was Angus's shadow, following him around the ranch and absorbing every lesson about cattle and horses with solemn attention. 3-year-old Elizabeth, their surprise blessing, had her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady gaze. And baby Joseph, just learning to walk, toddled after his siblings with cheerful persistence. The small ranch house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. Angus had added 2 bedrooms and enlarged the kitchen, where so much of their family life centered. The property now included a thriving vegetable garden, fruit trees beginning to bear, and a small flock of chickens that kept them supplied with fresh eggs. On a warm June evening, as the children played in the yard under the watchful eye of 12-year-old Mary Hollister, who often helped with the younger ones, Virginia and Angus sat on the porch swing he'd built for her last birthday. "Remember when you said you'd love me and every child I bring?" Virginia asked, watching Alice push Joseph on the small wooden swing Angus had hung from the oak tree. "Best promise I ever made," he replied, his arm around her shoulders. Virginia leaned into his embrace. 4 children in 6 years. More than you bargained for, perhaps. Angus chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "I'd have a dozen more if you wanted." She playfully swatted his arm. "For us plenty for now. Thank you very much." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and pink. Their lives had settled into a rhythm of work and love, challenges and joys shared equally between them. "The Peterson place is for sale," Angus mentioned casually. "Old man Peterson's moving to Oregon to live with his daughter." Virginia nodded. "I heard. Mary told me while we were baking yesterday." "Been thinking we might buy it," Angus continued. "Join it to our land. Give us more grazing for the cattle, and room to expand. Virginia turned to look at him. "Can we afford it?" "Been saving," he admitted. "Set aside a little each month since Will was born." "Nearly enough now." Pride swelled in Virginia's chest. This man, who had taken in a desperate pregnant woman out of pure kindness, had built not just a family, but a legacy for their children. "You're an extraordinary man, Angus Reid," she said softly. He shook his head, a slight flush coloring his weathered cheeks. "Just doing what any man would do for his family." "Not any man," Virginia corrected. "You." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Virginia and Angus lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom. 6 years of marriage had only deepened their connection, physical and emotional. "I've been thinking," Virginia said, her head on his chest, "about taking next year off from teaching. Mary Hollister's nearly finished her schooling, and she'd make a fine substitute. With the Peterson land, we'll need more help here at home." Angus stroked her hair. "You love teaching. Don't give it up on my account." "Not giving up," she clarified. "Just shifting priorities for a while. The children are growing so fast. And if we're expanding the ranch." "Whatever you decide," he said. "I support you. Always have, always will." Virginia smiled in the darkness. That was the foundation of their marriage: unwavering support, absolute trust, and a love that had grown from an impulsive declaration into something so solid and true it defined their very existence. The following spring brought the purchase of the Peterson property and a flurry of activity as they integrated the additional land into their ranch. Angus hired 2 more hands to help with the expanded operation, and Virginia took a sabbatical from teaching to focus on their home and children. On the anniversary of her arrival at the ranch, what they now celebrated as their finding day, Angus surprised Virginia with a trip to town for a special dinner at the hotel restaurant, leaving the children with Mrs. Hollister for the evening. Virginia wore her best dress, a deep blue that complemented her auburn hair, now showing a few strands of silver. Angus, in a crisp white shirt and his good suit, looked as handsome as the day they'd married. "To 7 years of miracles," he toasted, raising his glass to hers. "7 years of love," she countered, smiling. After dinner, they strolled through town arm in arm, stopping to look in shop windows and greet neighbors. Silver Creek had grown over the years, now boasting a proper bank, a millinery, and even a small photography studio. "Let's have our portrait taken," Virginia suggested impulsively as they passed the studio. "The children would love to see us all dressed up." The photographer, Mr. Simmons, was just closing up but happily accommodated them. "The famous Reids," he said with a smile. "An honor to capture your likeness." They posed together, Angus standing tall and proud behind Virginia's chair, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. When Mr. Simmons showed them the glass plate, Virginia felt tears spring to her eyes. There they were, the desperate young woman and the lonely cowboy, transformed by years of love into this confident, contented couple. "It's perfect," she whispered. The portrait, framed in simple wood, took pride of place on their mantel, alongside smaller photographs of each child and the faded image of Anne, which Virginia had insisted remain as part of their family history. Summer unfolded in a tapestry of golden days. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, learning responsibility through chores matched to their ages and abilities. Alice helped Virginia with the younger children and showed a talent for numbers, keeping simple accounts for the chicken, eggs, and garden produce they sold in town. Will was Angus's right hand with the livestock, absorbing knowledge about breeding and care like a sponge. Elizabeth revealed an affinity for horses that delighted her father, while Joseph toddled after everyone, determined not to miss anything. In August, they hosted a community gathering to celebrate the expanded ranch. Neighbors from miles around came to share food, music, and conversation. Men discussed cattle prices and weather predictions, while women exchanged recipes and news. Children played improvised games in the yard, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. Virginia, serving lemonade to a group of women seated under the oak tree, caught sight of Angus across the yard. He was demonstrating rope techniques to a circle of boys, including Will. The afternoon sun gilded his still strong frame, highlighting the silver now liberally streaking his sandy hair. As if feeling her gaze, he looked up and met her eyes. The smile they shared across the crowded yard held 7 years of shared history, private jokes, passion, and abiding love. Mrs. Hollister, now in her 70s, but still sharp as ever, noticed the exchange. Still moon-eyed over each other after all this time, she observed with satisfaction. "Knew you two were meant from the start." Virginia laughed softly. "Did you now?" "Course I did," the older woman replied. "Saw how he looked at you that first Sunday at church. Man who'd sworn off love, looking like he'd found the sun after years of darkness." The description touched Virginia deeply. "We found each other when we both needed it most," she said simply. As autumn approached, bringing cooler weather and preparation for winter, Virginia received an unexpected letter. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, postmarked from San Francisco. Inside was a brief note from a lawyer, informing her that James Lawrence had died of pneumonia, leaving instructions that Virginia be notified. There was no mention of Alice, no acknowledgement of the child he'd abandoned before birth. Virginia stood in the kitchen, the letter trembling in her hands, unsure how to feel. There was no grief for the man who'd betrayed her trust, yet a strange sense of closure washed over her. "Bad news?" Angus asked, coming in from the barn to find her standing motionless. "James is dead," she said quietly, handing him the letter. Angus read it quickly, his expression unreadable. "How do you feel about this?" Virginia considered the question carefully. "Sad for the life he chose. Grateful for the life I found instead." She looked up at her husband. "Should we tell Alice someday?" Angus set the letter aside and took her hands in his. "When she's older, perhaps. She should know her history. But it doesn't change who she is, our daughter, in every way that matters." Virginia nodded, leaning into his embrace. "Our daughter," she agreed. That evening, watching Alice help Elizabeth with her reading while Will and Joseph built a tower of wooden blocks on the floor, Virginia felt a profound sense of rightness. This family, created through both blood and choice, was her greatest achievement, her deepest joy. Winter came early that year, with heavy snows isolating the ranch for days at a time. The enlarged house felt cozy rather than crowded, filled with the children's activities, lessons at the kitchen table on days too cold for Alice and Will to make the trip to school, and evenings spent reading aloud or playing simple games. Christmas brought its usual magic, with handmade gifts exchanged and carols sung around the piano Angus had surprised Virginia with the previous year. The children hung stockings along the mantel, eyes wide with anticipation as they placed cookies for Santa beside them. After they were asleep, Virginia and Angus filled the stockings together, their annual ritual performed in companionable silence. "Remember our first Christmas?" Angus asked as they sat before the fire, admiring their handiwork. Virginia nodded, smiling at the memory. "Alice was just a few months old. You gave me that book of poetry I still read. And you gave me this," he said, touching the watch chain visible across his vest. "Still keeps perfect time." They sat in comfortable silence, the crackling fire and ticking clock the only sounds in the peaceful house. "I've been thinking," Angus said finally, "about what you said last spring about teaching." Virginia looked at him questioningly. "Maybe it's time I hire a full-time foreman," he continued. "Someone to take over the day-to-day running of the ranch. The children are getting older. You might want to return to the classroom." Touched by his consideration, Virginia squeezed his hand. "Are you sure? The ranch has always been your passion." "You and the children are my passion," he corrected. "The ranch is just what I do." And I'm not saying I'd stop completely.
Just.
Step back a bit. I'm not as young as I was. At 52, Angus was still strong and vital, but Virginia had noticed him moving more carefully after long days in the saddle, rubbing his shoulder, where an old injury sometimes troubled him. We could consider it, she agreed. In the spring, perhaps. See how things stand then. He nodded, satisfied.
No rus.
Just thinking ahead. As they prepared for bed, checking on each sleeping child along the way, Virginia reflected on how their partnership had evolved over the years. Each decision made together, each challenge faced as a team, each joy multiplied by sharing. Spring brought renewal to the land and changes to the Reid household. After careful consideration, Angus hired Samuel Johnson, a capable young rancher with a growing family of his own, as foreman. The arrangement allowed Angus to focus on the business aspects of the ranch, while Samuel handled the daily operations. Virginia returned to teaching part-time, sharing the position with Mary Hollister, who had developed into an excellent educator in her own right. The arrangement gave Virginia the best of both worlds, the satisfaction of teaching and ample time with her family. Alice, now 7, showed her mother's gift for learning, devouring books and asking insightful questions that sometimes left her teachers scrambling for answers. Will continued to thrive outdoors, his natural affinity for animals evolving into a serious interest in veterinary medicine after he helped Angus deliver a difficult calf. Elizabeth, 4 and fearless, rode her pony daily under Angus's watchful eye, while Joseph, having mastered walking, seemed determined to run everywhere, keeping Virginia constantly on her toes. On a warm May evening, as Angus and Virginia sat on their porch swing watching the children play a game of tag in the yard, he took her hand in his. 8 years ago today, he said softly, a beautiful woman stumbled into my yard in a thunderstorm. Virginia smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. And a kind cowboy said the most extraordinary thing to her. I meant every word, Angus murmured, his lips brushing her temple. I'll love you, and every child you bring. And you have, Virginia replied, watching their 4 children, the one she had brought, and the 3 they had created together playing in the golden evening light. Beyond all imagining. As the sun set on another day at the Reid Ranch, Virginia thought about the incredible journey from that desperate night to this peaceful evening. The path hadn't always been smooth. They'd weathered storms, both literal and figurative, faced challenges, made difficult decisions. But through it all, they'd built something beautiful together. A home filled with love, a family bound by choice as much as blood, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all begun with a cowboy's impulsive declaration to a stranger, words that had seemed impossible in the moment, but had proven profoundly true with each passing day. I love you, Angus Reid, Virginia said, turning to meet his gaze. His eyes, still as blue and steady as the day they'd met, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. And I love you, Virginia Reid. Always have. Always will. As darkness fell, and they called the children in for supper, Virginia knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home, not in a place, but in the heart of the man who had loved her before he knew her, and in the family they had built together on that foundation of unconditional love.